I'm Jacob Chandler, and I'll be conducting an interview with a veteran of military service. Today is October the 4th, 2015, and I'll be interviewing Brother Dominick DiCarlo. He is a veteran of military service, and he lives here in LaSalle Parish. This interview is part of my Eagle Scout Service Project. The LaSalle Veterans Exhibit and interviews are part of my Eagle Scout Service Project. The LaSalle Cultural Center of Gina, Louisiana will display the LaSalle Veterans Exhibit. Our mission is to preserve our LaSalle Parish heritage. The veterans of LaSalle Parish often have experiences from the time of service that go untold. Brother Dominick, what time or era did you serve in?
Just after Vietnam, 1976 through 1981, actually.
Yes, sir. What branch of service were you in?
I enlisted in the Air Force.
What was your rank?
Rank going in was, I had one stripe, and that was because of ROTC in high school. And upon discharge, I was an E4, which would be a buck sergeant. Now that rank is no longer in existence in the Air Force. I had a line number for staff before my 4th year of service. Chose not to extend to or re-enlist to sew that on. Instead chose to go to LSU. So technically it was a buck sergeant when I got out.
Yes, sir. Can you point to the areas on this map where all you served at?
Sure. Well, the first couple of months was in the state of Texas, and of course that was Lackland Air Force Base, and a place called Camp Bullis, nothing but woods. And after my training, I went to Italy, and in the northern portion of the state, close to the Italian Alps. It's a little community called Aviano, and the Italian Alps run right through the top of there, and so we were right at the base of the Italian Alps. Spent 2 years there in Aviano, and then upon my release from that tour duty, I went back to Texas and was at a SAC base, which was Dyess Air Force Base. And I enjoyed both of those tours of duty, both in Italy and also in Texas.
Yes, sir. Well, how old were you when you entered into military training?
I signed up early. I signed up, I was 17. I went in when I was 18, and then when I got out, I was 21.
Yes, sir. What all areas did you serve at? What all areas did you train at for your service in the U.S., sir?
Okay, you mean the locations?
Yes, sir. Location.
Okay, as I said about Lackland Air Force Base, that's where all basic training is for the Air Force, and that's San Antonio. That was both basic training for enlisted and, in my case, my tech school was located there. So I did my technical training there. And that involved a couple of different areas. One was law enforcement, another one was nuclear security. How do you secure nuclear weapons during peacetime, wartime? How do you transport them over ground? The law enforcement was general. It was law enforcement as pertaining to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And then, after that training at Lackland Air Force Base, I went to Camp Bullis.
Yes, sir.
Sometime shortly before I was entering into the Air Force, I believe DOD understood the coming wave of terrorism, and so they started training young men and women in my squadron to combat terrorists. So Camp Bullis was CSTTT, which was combat skills, anti-terrorist threat training. So that we spent a couple of weeks doing that, which basically was in the woods for the combat skills, honing our combat skills, refining further what we were introduced to in basic training. specializing in combating also terrorism. Now, we spent 2 weeks there with a heavy emphasis upon the anti-terrorism portion. We dealt a little bit more intensely with some of the heavier weapons, the weapons that you didn't touch when you were in basic training. And most of us in basic training handled the M16 to some degree of proficiency. There are different levels that you could achieve. But Camp Bullis was to refine that, to hone your skills with weapons. M60s, which is a 7.62 caliber, fully automatic machine gun. You did carry the M16, but you also did grenade launchers like the 203 mounts right underneath the 16. So that was some of the training there. Also, we were tasked with VIP protection.
Yes, sir.
So if there was a need to augment Secret Service or other state agencies when a diplomat or a VIP would be on a base, and then they would augment that VIP protection with us. So that in general was my peacetime. Wartime, it was different. In a state of war, our specialty was base protection. So it was, how do you protect the base? And war is all about ground, gaining ground, and holding it. Without the runways, the Air Force can't function. So our assets remain on the ground and of no use to anyone. So our job was to protect that base. And so that meant perimeter work, close-in work, protecting the aircraft that were priority A resource aircraft. Priority A resource aircraft were aircraft that were loaded with nuclear weapons. So our job was to protect those during peacetime and, but more importantly, during a state of war.
Yes, sir. Well, did you have any other specialty training besides this?
No, that's when you're in the military, you're always training.
Yes, sir.
You're always honing your skills, and the military gives you enough training to get you out and get you working, so that you are deployable. And once you hit the field, then there is, for as long as you are in the military, you're always training. Beyond that tech school and that which happened at Camp Bullis, the next level of training was in what I would call a weapon storage area, WSAs. You didn't learn how to do alarm work and that sort of stuff while you were in basic training or in tech school. So one of the jobs I had when I was in the Air Force, wherever there was a weapon storage area on base, and both bases where I was located had nukes. So you had to train someone to monitor those alarms. Most of these are underground, and but you also have perimeter alarms. And so the training involved from troop to troop, not going to a class or going to a seminar, but OJT training mostly, in protecting the weapon storage area by monitoring the alarm systems, which were multiple around a weapon storage area.
What job assignments or positions did you serve in while you were in the military?
Well, that which I just spoke about.
Yes, sir.
The technical term for that position was as an alarm monitor, which basically involved big panel boards with an area map and all the hot structures, which were the nuclear loaded structures, represented on the panel board. We'd monitor that. In Italy, at Aviano, you always had earthquakes and tremors, so we always had alarms going off. There were the occasional tests to our security systems by groups outside. The Baader Meinhof was the terrorist group in Germany. The Red Brigade was a terrorist group that was in Italy. So we always had nuisance alarms going off. And one we'd never know, is it a tremor? Was it an animal that hit a fence line and caused an alarm sector, to go off? Or was it someone who actually purposefully, intently tripped that alarm to see what our response was going to be? In the 2 years that I was overseas, we did spot one individual who rushed to the fence line, attempted to climb over the fence line to get into the area right next to our WSA, right next to our nuclear area. There was the conventional weapons, and so one person did try to get into that area. We never knew if it was to test what our response was going to be, but we repelled that threat. So.
Well, did you or your company you were with receive any awards or decorations?
I went what was called below the zone for one of my stripes. If you stood out in any way, either academically or just by the job that you performed, a certain number of individuals were allowed to go in advance of a particular stripe, senior airman stripe. So you could go, not wait the normal amount of time if they felt like you were ready to go ahead and sew on the next stripe. So I did go up below the zone. I sewed one stripe on early. That put me in an early slot to test for staff. And so that's how I got to test for staff and got that line number for a staff sergeant. I had been nominated for things like Airman of the Year, but those sort of awards, if you're squared away and you're doing your job, you have the opportunity to be distinguished, which is quite the contrary, or quite not as what you're doing in basic training and in tech school. You're trying to function as a team where no one particular member stands out. So you're a team always, and from time to time there are these welcome pats on the back for those that stand out.
Yes, sir. Well, I remember you saying about a person that rushed your fence, set off the alarms. Were there any other memorable events that happened during your service?
Nothing related to the protection of the weapons, base security, or base law enforcement. Nothing like that. And actually you always had the same sort of crime and criminal activity on a base. A base is a small little city, as you would have in a small town or a large city. So there were all, we had our thefts and unfortunately we had murders and things of that nature, things that took place, DWIs, and so those kind of things our squadron would take care of. We were tasked with handling that. So most of our job during peacetime is the natural health and safety of the population of military men and women and their families. That's on the base. So it's a lot of routine work that went along with what I was doing. On the nuclear side of it, it's even more routine, because that's the kind of job you don't want to see anything happen at all.
Yes, sir.
So you want to make sure every weapon is safe and that there's never a threat to any of those weapons. From time to time, because of our overseas duty, we would get OSI reports each night on what the terrorist threat briefing was. And they actually called it a terrorist threat factor. So they would give us a number from 1 to 10 after guard mount, telling us this is the terrorist activity. Of course, if you had a 1, then it was very little to no terrorist movement within the area. If you had a 10, then everyone was on a heightened state of alert. And from time to time, you would hear of a heightened state of alert. We'd have to put on a little bit extra security. Maybe some C4 had been stolen and it was loose, so naturally we're wondering where is it and who's it meant for.
Yes, sir.
So you'd have some nights that were like that. And then you had occasions where people would try to break onto the base. Of course, we'd have to deploy, could have been in a drainage ditch, any place, and just provide some eyes at that sector during that tour of duty to make sure that the base fence line was not breached. So we had to protect ourselves while we were overseas. Unfortunately, we had to do the same thing when we were in Texas. We had issues when we were in Texas as far as with base of security. So, that's exciting, but really the best night is when nothing happens.
Yes, sir. Well, let's see. After your service ended, what did you do? Did you go into work, or did you go to college on the GI Bill?
Went to college, went to LSU on the GI Bill. And I took 2 years of college while I was in the military, so all the time while I was serving I was going to school during my off hours. And then went to LSU after a discharge, and then worked on my undergrad. Did a little bit of graduate work there also. I did use the GI Bill. It's fantastic that our country will provide that sort of support. And that education aspect of the GI Bill appeals and is very appealing to those that are in the military. But you want our men and women that want to excel. You want them thinking about their future. And so the GI Bill provides a way for you to step out, get that education. Some men and women do actually return after that education and go back into OTC or something like that. My case, it was the seminary.
Well, how did your military service affect your occupations later in life?
Well, you learn to function as a team. I mentioned that earlier. And that's always emphasized. And so when functioning as a team, you also learn that every team member is of the same value. Now we all make different contributions to the team effort, but as a team you function to achieve a particular goal. So a person that's in the military learns how to cooperate, learns how to integrate their skills with other skills, and to bring their assets to the table so that an effort could be achieved. That's a valuable asset to companies. You're also trained to think in a certain way. You want to excel. When I was in the military, sometimes resources were somewhat unavailable. And so you had to learn to do the best you could with what you had.
Yes,
so that meant being a little bit thinking about how can I get the job done with the resources that the nation has given us. So you had to use your ingenuity, and you think through problems in order to achieve a solution. That's another asset that translates quite nicely into business and into civilian life.
Yes, sir. Well, during your service, did you make any close friendships that you continue today?
I sure did. I sure did. The first tour, which was in Italy, you've got a lot of guys that are just out of basic training, just out of their tech school. Most of us were not married at the time. You're dorming in one building. You're working with these guys. Mind you, the guys I worked with were 60 strong. So every night you had these 60 security police, law enforcement contingent going out onto the base. So you worked together for 10 hours, and then when you were off, you stayed together, and you became a family. Many of those names, those faces, I do remember. We stay in contact with a large number of them, either through Facebook or some other way. We'll place calls, to one another. We try to keep up with families. We have reunions, and those are friendships that you form that you don't forget. You're away from family the first time in your life. And that means you celebrate Christmas and Easter, holidays, vacations. You even do that, that kind of stuff together while you're on, with these guys. So yeah, they have meant a lot to me. And one of them, when I was in Texas, led me to the Lord. And so that young man's name is Peter Grasso. He and Tony witnessed to me, and I accepted Christ as my Savior. In fact, not too long ago, Peter came to the church, to First Baptist, and preached there once.
Yes, sir. I remember that. Well, thank you, sir, for your interview today, and also for your service. I'd also like to thank Caleb Hudlin for operating the camera for us today.